When the train's lights died inside the tunnel and the carriage fell into a sudden black so complete I could hear my own heartbeat count its sins, I felt the cold circle of a Luger kiss the back of my neck and realized the voice that told me not to scream belonged to the only man in France who still knew my real name. And that's when I understood the mission had been compromised long before I stepped onto the platform at Gare de Lyon. They called me Lark in the circuits that pretended birdsong could outrun radios. But in a life measured by aliases, my mother's name lived like a matchstick hidden in my sleeve. Elodie Maréchal, 24, student of nothing and everything, a courier for the Maquis with a knack for not being noticed. I wore a gray coat mended at the cuffs and carried a basket that smelled faintly of oranges and ink. In the false bottom were microfilm strips wrapped like licorice, lists of signal stations, fuel depots, and a timetable for troop trains that would matter in June if June could learn to be brave. Outside, Paris breathed that peculiar winter breath of occupation. Boots on stone, bicycles with bells that didn't dare ring, and windows gutted of light by curfew. I was good at passing. That's what they used me for. Ghost errands between addresses that pretended to be other addresses and names that evaporated as soon as they were spoken. But the man with the Luger in the dark didn't say a name. He said, "Don't move, little bird," in a voice that remembered a summer before the war when we had once shared a cheap bottle of wine near the river. And that meant the past had found me in a city that had forgotten how to keep secrets. The lights returned in a tired flicker, and the barrel followed the vertebrae of my neck like a sermon. People in the compartment looked away by instinct. In occupied Paris, madness and crimes of the uniform happened off stage. I turned my head very slowly until I could see him out of the corner of my eye. His hat sat too neat. His coat had the wrong kind of honesty. His hair was darker than I remembered. His eyes were the same, clever and tired. We had once called him Jonas, because it felt like a name that could carry a man through a whale, but the files called him Pierre Arnaud when they bothered to call him at all. "Get off at WWII," he whispered. "Do not run." I smiled a small, impolite smile. Something I learned makes men miss a step. "If you were going to arrest me," I said, "you would have done it under better lighting." He almost laughed, and that was worse because there was a kindness in his throat that didn't match the gun. "If I arrest you," he said softer, "I have to arrest myself." The tunnel spat us back into gray, and the Seine flashed like a knife too dull to cut. The conductor called stations we didn't mean to visit. I made a decision that did not belong to wisdom. I blinked twice, leaned forward as if to reach for my bag, and dropped my weight sideways. The shot, muffled by his coat, took a bite out of the luggage rack. Someone screamed the way people scream when they think the scream can be explained as a train's ordinary complaint. I was already through the door to the coupling, wind half strangling me, the tracks beneath blurring into a single iron sentence. Pierre followed, swearing in a French too clean to have been learned here, and that was when I realized my first mistake wasn't trusting him. It was remembering him, which is a different kind of betrayal entirely. At WWII, the platform bloomed with felgendarmerie like mold in damp bread. I stepped into them empty-handed and smiling the way a girl smiles when she knows who she's meant to meet. The trick to moving through a net is to know the knot the fisherman ties. "Herr Wachtmeister," I said, breath puffing white, "I think a man in my carriage fired a gun." I made my eyes beginner's big, the way actresses do when they realize the hero isn't coming, and pointed with the wrong hand toward the far car while my right eased the basket's hidden latch. A sergeant with a jaw like a staple barked something to the others, and for one blessed moment the tide in front of me shifted sideways. I slipped through. Pierre's shadow slid against mine on the tiles. A second heartbeat. He could have knocked me down and been done. Instead, his hand caught my elbow in a gesture that remembered ballroom rules. "You'll die this way," he said. "Not today," I said, and he smiled like a man who has already purchased his regret. Outside, the air had the metallic taste of snow. I vanished into a street market that wasn't, a dozen stalls that forgot to arrive, and a cluster of women who traded war's currency, bread, matches, rumor. A child dragged a wooden horse by a string that had been a shoelace. A church bell tried and failed to make noon sound holy. I went 3 streets north, cut left, ducked into a courtyard where laundry lines made a low ceiling, and knocked on a door that had never once belonged to a person born in this century. It opened on a face that could have been my aunt if I'd had a good life. And she said what she always said, "You're not late if I haven't finished the tea." She was Simone Laurent to me, Madame Laurent to the street, but to the Gestapo she was no one, which was her favorite hobby. I stepped inside and exhaled the kind of breath you save for rooms where people refuse to be afraid out loud. But I had brought the wolf with me, and the wolf wore a familiar coat. Simone's flat smelled of soap, onions, and carbon paper. The combination always made me feel like the world could still be typed into existence. On her table sat the radio we never used when the neighbors could hear our walls, a British suitcase set with a temper that needed coaxing and the patience of saints. I slid the microfilms from the false bottom and passed them to Simone, who tucked them into a tin-marked anise that once actually held anise. "You ran," she said, not looking at me. I considered lying. "I didn't," I said. She smiled. "Good girl." She poured tea that tasted like permission. "He's back," I added. Her hands paused. The smallest shiver, a chord struck inside old wood. "The one you called Jonah," she said. "Did he save you or hunt you?" "Both," I said. "He does not know how to do only one thing." Simone nodded like a parishioner who has heard sermons from a priest she doesn't trust but still prays beside. "He will come again," she said, and before I could answer, someone knocked a rhythm at the door that meant the world outside wanted to be let in. Simone didn't move as quickly as she used to. I put my hand on the knob. "If it is him," she said, "remember this. The men who sell you out don't always mean to. Sometimes they simply refuse to decide what they are." I opened to a boy with a baker's cap too large for his ears. He held out a baguette wrap with nothing in it but paper. Inside the paper, a line of code. Bridge 2320. Lantern only. The bridge meant Ivry. The time meant no one was going to sleep yet. The lantern meant the blackout would be broken by a signal that could cost you your life if anyone disagreed. I folded the note into my palm. "Tell your uncle," I said, "that the bread is perfect." The boy nodded gravely. Bread that never existed had saved more lives in this city than bullets that did. I closed the door and looked at Simone. She didn't ask to see the note. She didn't need to. "You'll need a coat that isn't yours," she said. "And a story that is." I took both. But, as I tied the scarf, a new knock came. Softer. And when I opened the door again, the man on the landing wore his hat exactly the way the voice in the tunnel would have. He didn't reach for the gun. Neither did I. Simone set down the teapot as if company had finally arrived. "We were just talking about you," she said. Pierre stepped in, closed the door with a courtesy foreign to the street, and took off his gloves finger by finger like a man removing evidence of a life he had outgrown. "You were always better at trains than I was," he said. I looked at his hands because eyes can be persuaded to lie. Hands are less ambitious. They shook. He had not slept, or he had slept poorly. "If you came to arrest me, the tea is poor," Simone said. "If you came to save your soul, it's worse." He nodded to her like a grandson who had done something stupid and needed to be scolded in a tone that made him feel like a child again. To me, he said, "Don't go to Ivry." "Who told you Ivry?" I asked. He smiled at that, at the sin of the question, not at the answer. "The river always tells," he said, "and the men in leather coats who drink too late." He glanced at the radio, at the window, at the way Simone had left a towel crooked on a chair. Tiny details spies notice when they've become suspicious of gravity. "They know about the bridge," he said. "They know about the lantern. They want you to come so they can practice being right." Simone's eyes flicked to mine. "Who is they today?" I asked. "Abwehr," he said then, after a beat that felt like a prayer, "and friends with black cars." "Gestapo?" Simone asked. "And the other friends," he added, "the kind that come later and read reports." I understood then that he wasn't simply saving me from a net. He was trying to untangle himself from a knot he might have tied. "If I don't go," I said, "men die in the morning south of Caen." He closed his eyes briefly, a man counting steps downstairs. "If you go," he said, "you die tonight." He opened his eyes and did something that startled me more than the Luger had. He took the tin marked A nice from the shelf, set it on the table, and pushed it toward me like an altar offering. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "Not tonight." The worst part wasn't that I didn't believe him. It was that a part of me desperately wanted to. "Then come with me," I said. "If you're lying, I'll find out. If you're not, I'll need someone who knows how the wolves circle." Simone cleared her throat, which in her house meant time is short and pride is silly. Pierre nodded. "All right," he said, and the part of the story I used to pretend would never happen put on its shoes. But the city had already begun to listen for our footsteps. We dressed as people no one misses. A seamstress in a borrowed coat, a clerk who owed too many debts to ask questions. The wind was a plain-spoken thing that night. It didn't pretend to be kind. We walked without touching, as people do when touching would be either too much or not enough. At Ivry, the bridge waited like a bruise under winter sky. The river moved with the kind of purpose that makes a person feel lazy for breathing. Our signal, lantern only, would tell a boatman we refused to meet that our side of the ledger was full. If he flashed back twice, the transfer would happen below, in the seam where arches pretended to keep stone from drowning. I took the lantern from my basket and held my breath as if the air might betray my lungs. "One sweep," Pierre said. "No more." I lifted the hooded light and cut a thin crescent across the dark. Nothing answered. He shook his head once. "Again," I said. "They're late." "Or dead," he replied, not unkindly. I swept once more. This time an answering flicker winked from the underbelly of the bridge. 2 quick blinks that could have been a boatman or a rifleman or the river teaching us a joke about consequences. "He's there," I said. "He's impatient," Pierre countered. "He's human," I said, and took a step toward the stairs. Pierre caught my sleeve, small, sharp. "Listen," he said. I did. Boots. The kind that had learned to walk like ghosts. They came from both ends of the bridge as if the city had decided we owed it something. "Run?" I asked. "Too late," he said. "Then strike first," I said, and somewhere under us a motor coughed the way a drunk does when he remembers a song. Pierre pulled me hard into the lee of a pillar and kissed me once on the mouth. A kiss so quick and unexpected that it turned my face away from the flash when the first shot stitched the stone where my eyes had been. A fragment bit my ear. The warmth felt obscene in the cold. I don't know if he kissed me to save my eye or to make me forgive him later for what he was about to do. And perhaps that's the point I keep missing. We dropped to the stairs, boots chopping air where our shoulders had been. The boatman was real, a smuggler named René who owed Simone something no one wrote down. He reached up to take the basket before I could argue, and that was when I saw his other hand holding a pistol from a country that preferred its pistols small. "They are on both sides," he said. "Pick a side and we drown on the way anyway." Pierre laughed softly, horribly. "You always were a poet," he said. The muzzle flashes above stuttered like a bad light bulb. Stone chipped and spat chalk. "Give me the basket," Pierre said. "I'll draw them." "You're the better shot," I said. "I'm the better liar," he replied. "They believe my feet." It's true, he had a way of walking that made lanes part, as if the street wanted to hear him finish a thought. "No," I said, and pushed the basket into René's hands. "Go," I told the boatman. "Hug the left bank, and when you think you've gone far enough, go farther." He stared at me as if I had asked him to adopt the moon. "Go," I said again, and then I did the only thing that made sense. I lifted the lantern high and ran up the stairs toward the east end of the bridge, a moving star for anyone who wanted to buy my story. The guns followed the light. Men always have. René's motor sneezed, then caught, then obeyed like a dog who remembers the kitchen. Pierre swore, a tight, private oath, and sprinted after me, my useless conscience with good aim. The shots came closer. The stone sang. I reached the top and found the first feldgendarme too surprised by the speed of a small woman with a lantern to be embarrassed at dying. I shoved the light in his face, saw his pupils tighten, and shoved him over the rail with every ounce of hunger I had left. He screamed once, a sound swallowed by the river the way a promise is swallowed by time. Pierre took the second man. In the simplest way, men have ended other men since Cain and Abel, and we ran. and the bridge turned behind us into a rumor that history would pretend not to know how to tell. We didn't go back to Simone's. We didn't go anywhere that belonged to anyone we liked. We went south by streets that had learned to be crooked and cut across a square where a statue had been covered against shame. We stopped in a doorway that belonged to a tailor who had been deported last spring. I don't know who pays his rent now. Pierre leaned his head against the cold wood like a man asking a wall to hold his thoughts. I touched my ear, blood, and a memory. "You kissed me," I said, trying for lightness and failing. "You didn't slap me," he replied. "We were both busy," I said. He laughed once, short and real. "What do you want to hear, Lark?" he asked. "That I'm a double agent with a conscience? That I sit in rooms and write reports that both sides use to betray the other, and neither side pays me enough to salve anything?" His breath made a white movie in the dark. "I want to hear," I said, "that when the lists reach the men on the coast and the radios speak the numbers in June, you will not hand a map of our veins to the men who carry knives." He looked at me for a long time, and then he said a sentence I still hate, not because it was cruel, but because it had the awful shape of truth. "I cannot promise not to betray you," he said softly. "I can only promise to do it for the right reason when I do." It was a confession from a man whose job was to never confess, and it should have made me turn away, but instead it made me do the most dangerous thing I had done all winter. I believed him. Before I could decide what to do with a belief like that, he flinched, head cocked like a fox hearing a trap spring. "Listen," he said. I did. "A car. Low, expensive, official." "Go," he said. "Window, roofline, Simone's second route." "And you?" I asked. "I am already late to my own betrayal," he said with that tired half-smile I had fallen for when we were 20 and stupid by the river. I touched his arm once in a way that wasn't professional and wasn't smart. "Where are you watching from?" "I want to ask you now, right at this hinge of the story. What city? What country? Tell me in the comments because I want to remember where this night travels when I'm not there to keep it warm." I clawed the drain pipe like a cat and found the roof the way you find a prayer when you don't have words. The car's doors opened as if the night had ordered them. Men climbed out, coats black, hats the kind that pretend their crowns aren't empty. Pierre stepped into the streetlight like an actor who has made peace with the bad script. They spoke too low for me to hear, but I could read the grammar in their bodies. The shrug of a man who has brought the wrong gift, the tilt of a head that says, "Try again," the bored cruelty of a man whose dinner is getting cold. They put him in the car, not as a friend or an enemy, but as a tool still useful. I ran the rooftops toward Simone because there was nothing else to do, and in running, I made a vow I have not stopped breaking. I told myself I would never see him again, and I told myself I would, and both felt like survival. Days in Paris are shorter when you aren't sure who you are. I slept twice in basements that had learned how to sound like nothing. I ate once. The radio in Simone's kitchen coughed like an old smoker. We fed it numbers anyway. 2 nights later, a postcard came from a town that no longer had a post office. Blank on the front, a smear of river on the back, and 5 words. "Don't open the anise tin." I stared at the tin until the afternoon lost patience. "You're going to open it anyway," Simone said. "Of course," I said. Inside, beneath the microfilm now in safer hands, was something I didn't expect and exactly what I should have. A photograph of us at 21 on the Quay, cheap wine between us, my head thrown back in a laugh I don't remember earning. On the back, in a careful hand that wanted to be legible to a stranger who might read it, he had written, "When they ask, I was never only one thing." There was more, a thread of numbers that looked like nothing until I turned the picture sideways and saw them for what they were, an overlay that, if laid on a timetable, would reveal which trains on which days would be less watched. I looked at Simone. "Is he ours?" I asked. She shook her head once, a weary mercy. "He's his," she said. "For now." The photo trembled in my hand the way a decision trembles in a throat before it becomes a word. Spring tried to arrive and failed, then tried again and stumbled forward. On a night when ration lines felt like amusements and the city smelled faintly of wet stone and courage, I went to a safe house near Clinton Court to receive a package I wasn't supposed to know was mine. Pierre was there first, sitting at a table with his hat in his lap like a penitent. He looked thinner, or perhaps my eyes had become hungrier. "You should have burned the picture," I said. "I did," he said. "That is its ghost." He slid a folded paper across the table. 2 names, 3 places, a date. "They will raid the press on Wednesday," he said. "They will take the boys with ink under their nails and pretend that makes them safe." "And you?" I asked. He looked at his hands. "I told them the raid would be Thursday," he said. "A calendar is a weapon if you use it right." It was treason of a small, exact kind. The most dangerous kind because it does not announce itself. "Why?" I asked. He smiled an apology he didn't know how to sign. "Because I wanted to be the man you thought I could be once," he said. "Just for a day." The door downstairs opened then, voices in the hall too polite to be harmless. He stood. "Go," he said. "There are 2 ways out. And you?" "I'll choose the door that needs a liar." I hesitated, which is how 1,000 people have died in wars without bullets. He touched my face the way a thief checks a pocket for the last coin. "It matters that you exist," he said, as if naming a fact could make it true. And the stairwell carried a new sound that had learned to be feared. I left by the window into a dusk that had been taught to kneel. He left by the door into men who had been taught to stand. They didn't drag him, he went. I don't know what he said in the room where they asked him to define himself. I know only what happened the next morning when a patrol found a body in the river that wasn't his with his papers in its pocket, and by afternoon he had vanished by being seen too clearly by those who needed a story. Word came by a route that had no business carrying the weight it carried. A barber who knew a baker who had shaved a man who had not needed shaving. The message was simple and burned the fingers that held it. He won't live twice. Keep your promise. I counted the promises I had made and chose the one that asked me to do the next right thing, even if I had no name left afterward to claim credit. When the June morning finally came, the one the men at the coast had been sharpening for 4 years, our radios spoke in couplets and oddities, and posters that had longed for sun peeled themselves from walls to watch the city hold its breath. I rode a bicycle without a seat down streets that had gotten their voices back and crossed a bridge that wasn't Ivry because Ivry and I had said everything to each other already. The lists had made it. The trains that mattered ran heavy where they were meant to run, slow and light where they aimed to run swift. Men died anyway because men do, and I have learned to be honest about that. But some lived because others used calendars like knives. I don't know which ledger keeps the math, but I have learned to write numbers in it when the pencil is offered. I saw Pierre only once more, and I do not entirely trust the seeing. It was after, when Paris was both a miracle and a rumor, and men who had hidden under beds during the worst of it came outside to point and name monsters. I was on the river at dusk with a paper in my pocket that said I had a right to be wherever the man reading it stood. On the opposite bank, a man in a hat exactly like his hat looked up, caught my face, and touched 2 fingers to his mouth like a kiss he owed me back. Then he turned and was part of a crowd that was part of a city that was part of a country that was trying to remember how to be one thing again. I never learned if he lived past whatever room they put him in next. I only learned that, later, a small envelope arrived at Simone's, unmarked save for a single pressed wildflower inside and a scrap of paper that said, "I kept a day. It is not enough. It is what I have. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to know where you're watching from. What city, what country, and which moment you wanted to shake me the most for the choice I made or didn't make. Tell me below so I can measure how far a night like this can travel without a train. Before you go, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with one person who believes a calendar can be a weapon and a promise can be a map. Your support keeps these almost forgotten stories alive.